All right, so you want to build a website,
Yeah.
and not just any website, a responsive one. Fancy. No worries, these sources we've got, they're actually super cool. They totally break the whole process down into like bite-sized chunks using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
It's really interesting how these sources emphasize that these languages are like a team, each with a specific role.
Yeah, like specialists, each with their own thing.
Exactly. It's a great analogy. Think of it this way. HTML lays the groundwork, CSS is all about the aesthetics, making it look amazing, and JavaScript brings the interactivity to the party.
Okay, I'm already loving this analogy.
Yeah.
So HTML is the groundwork, huh? So like the foundation of a house.
Exactly. Picture this. You're building a house. HTML is the structure. Walls, floors, roof, the whole shebang. It tells the browser what's what. Like, hey, this is a heading, or this is a paragraph over here, and this is an image. You get the idea.
Okay, so we're talking about building a solid structure first. You're not just slapping on some wallpaper without any walls.
Okay.
That's where those HTML tags come in.
You got it. Those tags, they're like labels for different elements. You use P for a paragraph, H1 for a main heading, giving your content structure and meaning. That's how the browser knows what to show and how to show it.
Gotcha. So it's all about giving the browser the instructions, and those tags, they're the language, right?
Precisely. It's all about communication, but instead of talking to a person, we're talking to a browser.
Makes sense. And then CSS comes in to do the whole interior design thing, right? To make it all look pretty.
Exactly. CSS is like your design toolkit. Think colors, fonts, positioning, everything, just so.
So CSS takes your website from bare bones to ready to roll.
Ah.
I'm here for that. These sources, they explain this super well with that box example.
Right. That's the classic way to visualize CSS. Imagine a plain box. This represents a basic HTML element, like a div. Now, with CSS, you can resize this box, give it some color, add a nice border, even around the corners, all with just a few lines of code.
Whoa, hold up. That's pretty amazing. You mean just a few lines can do all that?
Yep, that's the power of CSS. And by manipulating these boxes, you create the layout, the look of your website. It's like digital Legos, but way more flexible.
Okay, I'm starting to see how powerful this is. It's not just about making it look pretty. It's got to be about the experience, right?
Yeah.
For the people visiting your site.
Absolutely. Good design isn't just about aesthetics. It needs to be easy to navigate, visually appealing. You want people to want to use your website, right?
Right. And that's where JavaScript struts in, the life of the party.
Exactly. Think of it like this. If HTML is the structure and CSS is the style, JavaScript is the behavior. It makes your website react to users, creating that dynamic experience.
Oh, like when you go to a website and the images slide in, or you hover over a button and the color changes, that's all JavaScript doing its magic in the background.
You got it. That's JavaScript making the website come alive.
Okay, so we've got this website, right? It's looking pretty sharp, but it's still kind of like, I don't know, a printed brochure. How do we get things moving with this JavaScript? Those event listeners the source talks about, they seem like a big deal.
They are. Event listeners are key to making a website interactive. They're like, they let your code listen for specific actions from the user.
Actions like what? Give me some examples.
I think clicking a button, scrolling down the page, that kind of thing. When those things happen, the event listener triggers a response.
So it's like setting up these invisible tripwires all over your website, right? A user does something specific, bam, tripwire activated. And JavaScript swoops in to make something happen.
That's a great way to put it. It's all about cause and effect. You click this happens.
Right, like you could use that to create an image gallery where you can click through the images.
Right.
Or like a form that checks if you filled everything out right.
Exactly. Those little interactions make a huge difference. It's what makes a website engaging.
Totally. It's not enough to just look good anymore. It's got to be a smooth, responsive experience. Make people want to use it,
100%. And speaking of exploring, let's unpack these languages a bit more. We've got the big picture, but there are some key concepts that'll really, really empower you to start building.
Let's do it. Where do we start?
Let's unpack HTML a bit further. We talked about headings earlier. They're not just about making text bigger. They actually structure your content.
Oh, right. For users and like for Google too, right?
Yeah.
To understand your website better.
Exactly. Using the right heading tags tells search engines like Google what your page is about, which is huge for getting your site found. It's like giving your website a clear table of contents.
Makes sense. Got to keep Google happy.
Right. And speaking of organization, HTML has other elements for that. Lists, for example. All for unordered lists with bullet points. All for numbered lists when order matters.
Oh, that's handy.
Like if I'm listing ingredients for a recipe, the order definitely matters. But if it's my favorite bands, not so much.
Exactly. And for more structured data, like a pricing table, HTML has the table element. Rows, columns, headers, keeps everything neat and tidy.
Nice. So we're getting good at building the bones with HTML. But it's still pretty bare bones, isn't it? Time to bring in the CSS and make it shine.
Absolutely. Let's talk about how CSS actually links up with your HTML to make those stylish changes happen.
Okay, so we've got our HTML, like the blueprint, but how do we tell it to use our fancy CSS styles? It's like, they need a translator, right?
That's a great way to think about it. And there are actually a few ways to connect your CSS to your HTML, each with its own perks. One way is inline styles, adding CSS directly within an HTML tag.
So instead of a separate style guide, you've got like little fashion tips written directly on the blueprint itself.
Exactly. Handy for small tweaks, but for bigger projects, you'll want to keep your CSS separate and organized, and that's where internal or external style sheets come in.
Right. Too many cooks in the kitchen, or in this case, style instructions on the blueprint. What's the difference again between internal and external?
An internal style sheet lives within the head of your HTML document, tucked inside style tags. It's like having a dedicated style guide attached to your blueprint.
Convenient. But I mostly see these external style sheets when I'm looking at website code. What makes them so popular?
External style sheets are separate files, usually with a .css extension, and you link them to your HTML. Keeps things super organized, and you can use the same styles across multiple pages.
So it's like having a central design department that everyone can reference. Makes sense for big projects. But how does the CSS actually tell the HTML what to do? It's like they need a common language to understand each other.
They do. CSS uses selectors to target specific HTML elements and then applies styles within curly braces. Like, to make all your paragraph text blue, you would use the P selector followed by your style rule in curly braces .pp color.blue.
So it's like saying, hey, all your paragraphs out there, listen up, you're all going blue.
Exactly, and you can get incredibly specific with those selectors. Target elements based on their tag, their class, their ID, even their position within the HTML.
Wow, so much control. It's like CSS gives you this fine-tuned toolkit to really nail down the look and feel of your website.
100%. And once you combine CSS with JavaScript, things get really interesting. Remember those event listeners we talked about? That's the bridge between your style and user interactions.
Right. So a user clicks a button that's styled with CSS, and then JavaScript swoops in with an event listener, maybe changing the style or making something new appear.
Nailed it. And within JavaScript itself, there are some key concepts that make it so powerful, like variables. They're essential.
Variables. That sounds a bit mathy.
Not as scary as it sounds. It's just a container for storing information in your code. Think of it like a labeled box. You can put a number in there, some text, a true or false value, whatever your code needs.
Okay, so if I'm building an online store with JavaScript, I might have a variable for how many items are in the shopping cart, or another one for the user's address.
Precisely. Variables hold the data that JavaScript uses. And to work with those variables, to do calculations or update values, you use operators and functions.
Operators are like the tools you use to work with the stuff in those boxes, right? Adding numbers, checking if one value is bigger than another. What about functions? They sound a bit more complicated.
Think of functions like mini programs inside your main program. They perform specific tasks. Let's say you want a drop-down menu to appear when a user clicks a button. You'd write a function for that, and then you can use it again and again whenever you need that drop-down effect.
So it's like a time saver for actions you use a lot.
Yeah.
That's really clever. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, it's kind of mind-blowing. We started with the basics of HTML, then the styling power of CSS, and finally, the magic of JavaScript. What's the biggest takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
You know, web development is a journey, a learning adventure. It might seem daunting at first, but with all the amazing tools and resources out there, it's more accessible than ever. Don't be afraid to experiment, to break things, to learn by doing. That's how you really get it.
So true. It's empowering to know that anyone can learn to build for the web. And hey, who knows, maybe one day we'll be featuring your website in a future deep dive.